I want to congratulate the Women in Thoracic Surgery and the organizers for this very timely and important presentation and conversation. I'm hoping it will be a conversation. We really are honored to recognize what the challenges are, and many of you are fully aware of what they are. But really, it's about not only observing what the problems are, but how can we make some progress towards solving some of the issues. And I hope to share in a few minutes here some of the potential opportunities that we can improve and mitigate the effects of unconscious bias and implicit bias to be successful professionally and potentially save lives of patients who would be affected by it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of mentorship and sponsorship in that regard. So many of you may be aware of this story, but it's reflective of, I think, one of the strategies that can, in fact, have an impact. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story at Johns Hopkins, which many of you may be aware. As the medical school was being founded in 1889, Mary Elizabeth Garrett, who'd been a patron of the institution for many years, her father had been instrumental in helping to establish it as a medical school, they were short on resources. And it was known that they needed about $500,000 to $600,000 to make the medical school what it should be. And the president of the university was resistant to any motivation such as donations from women to make it a reality. And in fact, he was pretty resistant to accept any donations from women. In 1889, a group of women led by Mary Elizabeth Garrett put together resources from their personal inheritances to try to help the school open. The expectation was that women would be admitted on equal footing at that time. And ironically, Gilman said no initially. But as the medical school floundered, didn't have the resources, the trustees accepted this as a foundational gift and required $500,000. At that time, a huge amount of money. And as such, they could not raise the rest of the money through traditional sources. And Mary Elizabeth Garrett took it upon herself to donate from her personal resources the additional $300,000 to open Johns Hopkins Medical School. Now, this is an incredible, incredible example of taking a difficult situation and creating an opportunity for the medical school to open at Johns Hopkins. And in fact, women were admitted to the medical school on the same footing as men in the 1800s. So a remarkable example of what you can do with a focus and a commitment. So it's pretty clear, as you've heard earlier today, that unconscious bias impacts medicine and surgery across the spectrum of learners and faculty. And in fact, it can really be a challenge. But now we're responsible for addressing the issues. It's going to require strategic effort and commitments, not just platitudes and observational data. So my hope is that through this discussion about mentorship and sponsorship, we may learn how to mitigate these effects. Ultimately, as I've been quoted to me by others, you really want to create some visibility to others because you can't be what you can't see. If you're a woman in a leadership role or an African American or Hispanic person in a leadership role, you can't really model that unless you see someone else being successful in that role. It's clear that this has been in the lay press when the majority, it doesn't mean that white men can't be great mentors, role models, and many of them, as you'll hear in my story, have been instrumental. I stand on their shoulders by the experience and what they've shared with me. But it does become a challenge for women and for those who are underrepresented in our environments to aspire to aspirational leadership roles if they don't see examples of success. So the business case is pretty obvious, and this was, again, developed through some of the research we did with the Harvard Business Review looking at diversity and why some of these programs, which are intended, well intended, to fix the problem, have not been as successful. And ultimately, you have to ask the question, why do we continue to struggle on this front? Why can't we just outlaw bias? It would seem obvious that that would be the case, but in fact, it's very difficult. Some of the top-down strategies which have not been as effective as we would hope have focused on certain aspects. Number one, they have short-term effects, and they can, in fact, activate negative charges against the programs. They may even develop resistance in that context. Voluntary training has a positive effect. If the environment is nurturing and substantive, wants to make a difference, it then can be impactful. But often it can find some resistance. So what's the real problem? So in order to reduce bias and increase diversity, organizations are relying on programs which may have dated back to the 1960s and 70s as tools to change the landscape. Most of these diversity programs focus on managers, and you can imagine faculty and leadership roles, on their behaviors from a top-down perspective. In fact, studies demonstrate that these tend to activate some bias. They rather create obstacles, and ultimately people rebel against rules or if their autonomy is threatened or imposed upon them. And so the solution instead then may be, rather than developing police solutions, in fact providing opportunities for a more collegial work environment, to expose the faculty to a more diverse group of women and men who collaborate on, and certainly show positive attributes. And mentoring engages these managers or the faculty to enhance the opportunities of the proteges. Now, most managers and mentors are always willing to support the person that they've taken under their wing. And so it really does see that anyone I sponsor, as an example, must be deserving, and therefore you're going to promote their best interest. And so I think it's a positive light to make this connection between the mentor and the mentee. Further, it's pretty clear that performance ratings really are a challenge. They are supposed to ensure that the manager plays fairly in the work environment and provides appropriate balanced promotion decisions. In fact, these studies, as you've heard earlier today, show that raters tend to lowball women and minorities in performance reviews. So it's not really a level playing field, which is a continuing challenge. In terms of creating programs which empower reporting or grievance procedures, they're meant to identify and rehabilitate those managers and faculty leads who might be biased. But many of these managers, rather than change their own behavior or address discrimination by others, try to get even with or even undermine or belittle those who would be benefited by a more balanced approach. So the solution is obvious. A flexible, anonymous complaint system that offers a formal hearing process can often inform mediation and improve the situation significantly for those who would be subjected to negative reporting. Now, we have to be also aware of the unintended consequences which have been described, ironically, for underrepresented minorities and women. And this is the concept of the imposter syndrome among students and faculty. My medical school colleague, Juanita Merchant, has been a proponent of discussing this and has written about it at the University of Michigan. But this imposter syndrome really introduces the instance of self-doubt among highly achieving academic medical professionals, particularly of color. Well, they induce that into their own persona, and it ultimately leads them to leave the academic environment because they're afraid of failure or actually not necessarily being mentored. It's a terrible process and a terrible problem which many people in the audience may feel. They don't feel the confidence to be successful in the environment because they maybe don't belong, or there's not a critical mass of people who look like them who will share their experiences, and we'll talk a little bit about that ultimately. So the system needs to be more sensitized to support these students. And I think if we think about what programs will work as coming to solutions, I'm hopeful that these targeted strategic efforts can make a difference. First of all, college and medical school recruitment programs targeting women and minorities, providing them with the appropriate support, role models, and mentorship are critically important. Contact between groups with different perspectives, diverse schools of thought, as well as their backgrounds, can often be an equalizer in terms of experience Again, rotating some of our management, our senior faculty through some of these training programs to try to help them understand how important diversity is. And in fact, diversity could save lives among our diverse, underserved populations. It could certainly be a game changer. There certainly has to be some level of social accountability. Diversity, task force, focus groups, diversifying our management structure has a critical aspect of improving the environment. And in fact, mentoring certainly has a big impact. In terms of professional societies, I'm proud to say the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, as well as others, Women in Thoracic Surgery, in the STEM fields, the American College of Surgery, the AAMC, Society of Black Academic Surgeons, all are hearkening the need for addressing these critical problems in terms of implicit bias and unconscious bias. Again, considering the Rooney Rule, controversial a bit in terms of institutional inclusion of an underrepresented minority candidate or a woman whenever there's a faculty opening for a leadership position. In fact, it does open the door to say there are qualified candidates who don't necessarily look like the traditional candidate for a leadership job. By introducing the requirement to interview a person of color or a woman for a leadership role, it introduces the possibility that they could, in fact, be in that role. So it's an interesting concept that we have to consider. But ultimately, it's about leadership-directed core mission of inclusive excellence, making sure that inclusion and diversity enhance the environment for all. And hopefully that will be the sign that things are going in the right direction. Now, mentors in my life, my mom raised 3 boys by herself. She is my mentor and has been over the course of my career. I stand on her shoulders. But as we all know, mentors can be in all variety of shapes and colors. And in fact, this is just a picture of those who have been mentors in my career who've had a big impact in ultimately getting to this point at the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. They don't all look like me, and ultimately there aren't as many women as we need in that group, but nonetheless, we hope that they will be found. So mentorship does matter. A trusted friend or a counselor, someone who's a teacher, who can usually be a more experienced person and give you a relationship-led advice about how to succeed in the current environment, critically important to navigating the maze. It also involves advanced personal growth and development training for both the mentor provided to the mentee. And ultimately, the mentor is supposed to help you perceive not only your strengths, but your weaknesses, and help you confront them with courage. And ultimately, that bond is critically important to help you stay true to your dedicated course. Now, there are some differences between mentors, teachers, sponsors, and role models, and I'll spend just a minute talking about that. From my perspective, mentorship in this context, to be effective, requires mentor to have not only empathy and maturity and self-confidence, but they have to have a willingness to commit time and energy to your career and to your advice. Ultimately, they give you a guidance, which is not always just a pat on the back, but they give you evolving information about your professional life to stimulate you and challenge you to be successful. And they foster your growth to ultimately allow you to be successful in that environment. I think the differences between mentors who can be both teachers and role models is that few teachers and role models are mentors. Why? Because there's a difference in terms of the personal commitment of the mentor to the mentee, a critical element of success in this environment. So we've been fortunate, again, we've had some success at Hopkins in terms of identifying people who can be effective leaders. 3 division head women who have been successful at Johns Hopkins in an unprecedented manner, primarily because we believe it's the right thing to do, because they're the most qualified people to do those jobs. Ultimately, it creates a more inclusive community, optimizes our talent pool, and advances our organization towards success. It can, of course, again, also be really important to the mentor and to the mentee, because they see that it's a positive experience, that men in this environment will speak up for their success. And ultimately, it also empowers male mentors to see the big picture. And so, from that perspective, they are prepared to not only respond when they observe sexist behavior, but also right some wrongs. And so it's a reciprocal relationship that I think makes a big difference. And in fact, the mentors are really committed to the success of those young people. They are not only motivated to see them succeed professionally, they see them succeed as they balance their professional and their personal needs and obligations. We have developed a women in surgery group at Hopkins, again, trying to make sure that we provide the right kind of mentorship and role modeling that will eliminate some of these unconscious and implicit biases. Now, lastly, I'll talk a little bit about mentorship versus sponsorship. This is a great book, Find a Sponsor. It's written by Hewitt, and it's really a fantastic read, short read. It talks a little bit about the difference between mentors and sponsors. Mentors take an interest in counseling their protege, but a sponsor is someone who actually invests in your career, primary to your role as a leader, and advocates for your promotion and nomination. But there's a price for that. They have an expectation that you will succeed and you will have stellar performance and ultimately loyalty to their commitment. And that's an important consideration because it will advance your career long term. And I think the path to leadership is, in fact, with a sponsor at your side. As you move up in an organization, what you really need is someone who has enough leverage in the organization to make things happen and to level the playing field. Otherwise, it may not be as effective. So we believe that sponsorship in combination to mentorship are critically important to your success as a leader in surgery. So as I close, I think about a couple of different things that have been successful in my life and on my leadership journey. A couple things that you have to keep in mind as you're going through this path. You have to be able to look in the mirror and show some emotional intelligence. You have to embody purpose, of course, and have value-driven behavior. You can't walk alone. You need a team of people to help you build your cadre of folks to be successful. And you have to have a vision for the future and navigate beyond the horizons and think strategically as you create a vision. So from my perspective, the future of surgical mentoring that leads to elimination of these problems in terms of implicit bias is that you have to build a team of people around you. You need a career coach, you may need an executive sponsor, and you need a content expert as a mentor, all of which helps you become successful. So in conclusion, my final thoughts are that you can overcome an overt and unconscious bias. We all need role models, mentors, and sponsors. When your opportunity comes, I think you have to create your vision, execute your plan, and measure your success. But remember, it's a meritocracy. Effort without results is not enough. Effort without results is not enough. When you meet resistance or obstacles, you have to enlist the help of your mentors and your sponsors to navigate that maze. And if you need a coach, so be it, to enhance your emotional intelligence to be successful. I would also mention that peer support is critical. This is a group of young people that we mentor at the preschool level. If they want to be successful, it has to start early in their career. If you want to see more underrepresented minority students and faculty and leaders, you have to start early to ingrain this level of success and commitment to the future. So they'll end up like the women in this picture, who make up the core group of our faculty at Hopkins, and we're so proud of them because they are successful, bright, hardworking, accomplished women. So they've navigated the maze and ultimately overcome the problems. So I could close with saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together with peers and colleagues. And obviously you see that this lady has been very successful in accomplishing these goals. So thank you for the opportunity.